So the question is, where do we get the gods of the Old Testament? This is where we get the gods of the Old Testament.
Wow.
Baal, Molech, Ishtar, Asherah. These are the Bene Elohim
Of the nation. Why do you think the Tower of Babel was so threatening? I mean, because God says now nothing that they desire to do will be impossible to them. And I've heard it's like a ziggurat or something.
It's a ziggurat temple tower.
Certain reason the threat other than just idolatry and things like that? Or
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of theories around this. One of my theories is that and this is Joel's theory.
Yeah.
One of my theories is that this tower is actually going to be a gateway. It's a sacred space. It's a gateway into areas that humanity ought not go into. Right? And you have this sense in other places that on mountaintops, significant things happen. Mount of Transfiguration, Mount Hermon of Genesis 6. You've got on mountaintops, like, it's the encounter where the earthly and the supernatural realm meet. It breaks apart, right? But think about this. If there are holy places that are meeting places, then holy places are typically desecrated. This is why Asherah poles throughout the Old Testament are on mountains. Many times those Asherah poles are actually built on the very mountains where altars to Yahweh were built earlier in an attempt to desecrate those places. So I think the people are building what's called a ziggurat temple tower. We actually have archaeological evidence of this. This is part of my dissertation. That's the only reason I know all these details. So don't be like, oh my gosh, he's just pulling this out. Yeah. I spent 5 years studying this part. But there's archaeological digs that actually show it. And the way that it was designed is at the very top of the temple. So the top of the tower, there were steps leading to the very top. At the base of it, there would have been a room for the priests to live in. But at the very top of it, there was a house. And that house was the place for where the deity was going to come and live, so the deity could come down. And so the reason why I think God is so concerned about this, and we're going to see this in action when we get to Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9, is because humanity consistently has the propensity to worship what it ought not worship. Consistently.
Yeah.
We are quick to get enamored by shiny things.
Yeah.
And we think that just because something is spiritual, that spiritual thing is equivalent to Yahweh.
Right.
God.
This is why God says, have no other graven image before you. Have no other idol before you. Like all of these myths that we have that live on. Like, think about the fountain of youth, right? I was just talking to Annalise just earlier, like, think about the story of King Arthur and his and the Knights of the Round Table.
Yeah.
Where do we get the story? I think I know where we get the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. David and his mighty men. David and his mighty men.
Yeah.
Where else do you get? Do you get a king who's in trouble, who needs to get a bunch of people to come around him so that he can get, and where do you get Guinevere? Oh, Bathsheba. Like, and then you get the inverse of the story of Lancelot and Bathsheba, except this time David is the Lancelot and Uriah. Like it is crazy.
It is wild.
It is wild.
You can't get bored with the Bible.
I want to go to this passage now.
Yep.
So here, let's jump to Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. So there's this passage in the book of Deuteronomy that is, like I mentioned, I want you to think about this as the Marvel scene. This is the post-credit scene.
Come on, the
right?
extra scene you're waiting on.
Exactly.
Makes everything make sense.
Except God's kind of like, you're going to have patience, so you have to wait till Deuteronomy hits for this one. So, okay, imagine you have just seen the scene of the Tower of Babel, and I want us to put ourselves in that position. Here are these people that had been starting a project, massive project. They made some legway. All of a sudden, they can't talk to each other. Think about like, there's a humor kind of to this of like, you're literally working next to somebody for who knows how many years this was taking. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, hand me the pitchfork or hand me the shovel. It's like, huh? And like, it was probably mass confusion and chaos.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And people were like getting angry at each other. Like, why are you playing? Like, all that's happening. The scene ends. The last scene that you see on the screen is all these different people that are just going in groups their own directions. They're migrating away.
And this is where the nations
This is where the nations are. So let's think about it.
So good.
Indians, Africans, Europeans, Mexicans. With their language.
The enemies tried to take away the supernatural element to the things of God, to the grand story. And so a translator reads that and says that can't be what it means.
Yeah,
and
you're gonna get me in trouble.
Bring it down.
Yeah, you're gonna get me real in trouble.
Oh, we get in trouble all the time on this.
Right. Come on.
This is my opinion. I'll be clear. This is my opinion. Yeah. I think that there is a very clear strategy of the enemy to do two things. Either to minimize and neglect the supernatural spiritual world altogether, or to overemphasize it, to make it so obsessive, to make it the only thing that matters. And in both areas of the pendulum swing, the people of God have to exercise wisdom. Sons of God is Bene Elohim. Where does Bene Elohim show up? It shows up in Job. We're talking about the sons of God who are present in the beginning. That actually creates a hyperlink to the Genesis story of the creation account with Eden. And by the way, it's also mentioned in Genesis 6. What are the Genesis 6 beings with the Nephilim? The sons of God. So what this shows us is that the phrase sons of God overwhelmingly is referring to angelic beings. And if you take sons of God in Genesis 6 to be human rulers, this is just based off of hermeneutics, a hermeneutical principle, how you study the Bible. The weight and ownership is put on you, the individual who's deciding Genesis 6 has to be a human reading. It's on you to then make fair justification of why it's not that almost anywhere else. Why only in this passage is this rendered for humans and not angels? And at the end of the day, what they'll have to say is, because we're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We're uncomfortable with the fact that angels had union with, women and bore hybrid children. That's really the only option that they can say, because the Sethite view, all of that view is not coherent to the text. I'm going to pause. Anything? So all of this matters. Let me just do this last thing. And I want you guys to. So it's like why this is the most important puzzle piece to understand the Old Testament, because this is the origin story of the nations. Deuteronomy 4:19. This is what Moses says, right? He says this as a warning to the Israelites. Look at this. And beware, lest you raise your eyes to heaven. And when you see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven, which, by the way, are synonymous words and phrases in Job to describe the sons of God.
Yeah.
And all the hosts of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and to serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted, look at this language, has allotted to the peoples under the whole heaven. But the Lord has taken, he talks about Israel on its own. So when you go back to Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, it says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, according to the numbers of the sons of God. Look at verse 9. But the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted heritage. Okay, so what's happening here? This, right, with Deuteronomy 4:19 and elsewhere, what we get, what we compile as a story together, is that after the rebellion of Babel, God is fed up and he's angry and there's consequence to sin. And so to the nations, he basically goes, listen, I'm not putting up with you guys anymore. So he takes some of his divine counsel and he gives them the task, in very important language, to be stewards of the nations, to protect them, to guide them up until the point that he's going to bring them back into the family. This is why Genesis 12, the Abrahamic covenant, is so incredibly important. God's plan was always to have one family, and yet God is dealing with the consequence of sin. What ends up happening is that these sons of God go into full-on rebellion. Instead of stewarding the nations, they entice the nations to worship them. They entice them. So the question is, where do we get the gods of the Old Testament? This is where we get the gods of the Old Testament.
Wow.
Baal, Molech, Ishtar, Asherah. These are the Bene Elohim
Of the nation.
of the
nations that they were essentially appointed to.
And they became the quote-unquote false gods of the nations. When the Bible talks about the gods of the nations as false gods, this is not a statement of non-existence. It's a statement of non-supremacy. They are not Yahweh.
Sheesh.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, when you read
crazy.
your Old Testament, this
That's
makes
crazy.
sense
Yeah, no, it
of
does.
almost everything.
It does.